Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our in-use testing work group meeting for Tier 5. If you're here for Tier 5, you're in the right place. My name is Jenna Latt, and I'm the manager of the in-use control section. And before I start, we wanted to have Kim say a few words, and then we'll introduce ourselves. Kim, are you able to show your screen and video and unmute yourself?
Oh, I think Kim is in the attendees. We need to upgrade her.
Yeah, okay. I can start though while you do that. Christian, shall I do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Muslim or Upla, could you, I don't have the access to upgrade.
Actually, I am promoting her to panelist, but I don't know why it's not going to panelist.
Okay, well, let me start and then she can chime in. So good morning, everybody. I'm Jenna Latt, as I mentioned before, and I'm manager of the off-road control section. Thanks for joining us today at our public work group to discuss concepts for the manufacturer-run off-road in-use testing program for new diesel engines. And this is part of Tier 5 rulemaking. This is the first in a series of work group meetings for Tier 5, and we plan on having more work groups this year to discuss different concepts for elements, including the development of a low load cycle. So the purpose of this remote workshop is focused on in-use testing and discussion of off-road real, which is a new program. Both are new and have not been developed yet. One quick note is that today's Tier 5 workshop is a separate rulemaking process from the off-road in-use diesel fleet rulemaking, currently under development by another section at Carb. So our focus today is on new diesel off-road engines and is not directed at fleets. So we have a short agenda. Christian Bartolome will present his slides, and then we'll have a Q&A session. And if needed, we can take a lunch break and come back for more questions, or you may be able to wrap it up before lunch. It just depends. We've got the Zoom booked past 2 o'clock, so we're ready to take as many questions as you have. And I think that's all I have. So if we're really ready to, if Kim's able to speak now, otherwise we can. There's Kim. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning. I can speak and be seen. Good morning, everyone, and sorry for the technical difficulties there. Yeah, so I just wanted to, I see we have over 180 participants, so I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I just wanted to make sure to say that we really encourage stakeholders to give us feedback. The concept you're going to hear about today, we're pretty excited about it. It's pretty creative and innovative. We really want your thoughts and feedback on how you think it would work, if you think it would work, what you like about it, what you don't. As Jenna mentioned, we're about 3 years out from when we formally take a proposal to our board for this rulemaking, and we need to use that time to develop the best possible proposal. And the only way for us to do that is if affected parties speak to us. We've had some really productive and interesting discussions with individual manufacturers lately, and we're really hoping that information exchange continues over the next couple years. We recognize this rule is going to be a big deal for affected manufacturers and for folks that buy and use off-road equipment. So we're really eager to make sure we get it right so we can achieve the emission reductions that the people of California need, but in a way that doesn't negatively impact business and enables everyone to get their job done and keep the economy moving. So thanks for participating today.
And I just wanted to say one other thing, that we really appreciate people's feedback. Since the last workshop in November, we received quite a few really productive comments that we've been taking into consideration, especially the harmonization request, and we've been working with and meeting with China as well as EU. And the second thing is we had put out a letter to many engine manufacturers and equipment manufacturers in a request for data, and we've been overwhelmed with data. I want to say we so appreciate all the data that folks have given us, and it's been really fantastic in putting together our database for collection of data for the development of the low load cycle. So thank you again. We really appreciate all the efforts. We know it took a lot of time to put that together, and we do appreciate it. So thank you. So with that, we'll let Jeff introduce himself, and then Muslim, and then Christian.
Thanks, Jenna. I'll keep this brief. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jeff Lowry. I'm the lead staff for the Tier 5 rulemaking effort. I've been here a long time at Carb. I was around when we aligned with EPA with Tier 4. As Jenna and Kim both mentioned, we've had great meetings with industry and some of the associations recently. We hope to keep the information and the exchange of information, the dialogue, going smoothly. And we look forward to your comments today and with any of the questions you have regarding the Tier 5 rulemaking. Thank you very much.
All right, Muslim.
Hi, my name is Muslim Hussein Marti. I'm with Carb about 4 years, and I'm going to be a moderator for this work group meeting. And I'm going to ask for question during when the time comes for Q&A. Please raise your hand or type your question in the Q&A box, and we get to them. Thank you so much. I appreciate your participation. Thank you.
I'm Christian Bartolome. Mainly work on the e-news program for or the development or putting together of something, and we'll hear about more of that today for Tier 5. I previously worked on in-use requirements for on-road in the omnibus program. So maybe we should get into the slides, the meat of what's going on today, so we can get straight into the reaction and feedback from everyone. We're here to talk about the in-use program concepts. We went already over the next slide. That was the agenda. We had the wonderful introduction by Jenna and Kim. Here's the Zoom webinar details later for the question and answers segment. If anyone doesn't have a video or audio on their computer, they can go to access our meeting by telephone with the access code here. If you're using a phone, you could use #2 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. We'll hold the questions till the end of the presentation. And if you're in Zoom, you could either use the raise hand or type in the question and answer box in Zoom. Next slide, please. Yes, this is the agenda we went over. Kim and Jenna had given introductions. I'll be giving a presentation, and we'll follow that up with the questions and discussion. And then we'll follow it by next steps, any announcements, and the closing for today's workshop or work group meeting. Next slide, please. This is an outline of the topics I'll be discussing. We'll talk a little bit about the current California Air Resources Board off-road in-use compliance program. So that involves testing of off-road equipment by Carb staff. We're going to talk about some proposed changes to the program for Carb testing. Next, I'll talk about some of the background regarding in-use testing, the heavy-duty on-road in-use program, as well as some other programs for in-use testing, like large spark ignition engines. Then I'll go over our concept for the manufacturer run off-road in-use testing. We'll go over more details on like what kind of proposed reporting and what kind of proposed pass and fail criteria for the engine families. Since our last workshop meeting, we had heard a lot of feedback about portable emission measurement systems on off-road equipment and some challenges. And we talked together with internal testing staff and actually folks in the EU who also do testing of these off-road engines. And we can go over the challenges mentioned and some possible solutions. And at the end, we'll be requesting feedback on the concept. Next slide, please. So currently, Carb staff has the authority to conduct in-use testing on off-road engines, and that's just the California Code of Regulations referenced there in 2139G. The off-road engines are evaluated with the test procedures used at certification. So there's transient engine dyno cycles, steady state cycles, and the not to exceed. And currently off-road engines may be tested up to 75% of the useful life. Next slide, please. This is a list of some proposed changes or things we'll work on for the house side of testing. So we plan to clean up some of the language for it. And similar to EPA's recent release in the NPRM, they had changed over a cycle to call it off-cycle test procedures. And we'd like to include something like that for off-road. What this section would do is clearly define like how engines are tested when it's not in a laboratory, when it's done with real work, maybe for a shift day, what kind of temperature conditions or fueling conditions, ambient conditions are necessary for a valid test. It would also go over what kind of calculations methods for the emissions evaluation. We're also considering changes to expand the useful life limits for the off-road testing. Next slide, please. So some for the this is switching lanes from the Carb side of testing to the manufacturer run program testing. I'll give background on in-use testing, and then this is a little bit of a teaser for our concept for the off-road. Is we would have a phase one that involves ECU or sensors data submission and a screening process. If necessary, based on screening, it might trigger PEMS testing. And then in the final phase, if necessary, corrective actions if deemed necessary and non-compliance is shown from the PEMS testing. Next slide, please. All right, so here is a list of some of the engine types that are affected by in-use programs or some that are not affected by in-use programs currently. The on-road heavy-duty diesel engine has an in-use testing program. It was initially started because there was a non-compliance discovered, and after some settlement agreements and consent decrees, began the manufacturer run program, and the reference is listed there as subpart T in part 86 of the regulations. And in use, and this program was to ensure that engines running not only at certification but throughout their useful life and operation are within compliance, low emissions. The next category is large spark ignition engines. So this category also has a manufacturer run program. In the CFR, it's in 1048. Additionally, for large spark ignition engines, They have production line testing and selective enforcement audits. Now, there's a few categories that currently do not have a manufacturer side of in-use testing. The first is on-road auto engines, do not have one, but Carb has the authority and ability to do testing on those engines. And the category that probably is most interesting for today is off-road compression ignition engines. Currently, there's no program, but there is provisions for selective enforcement audits for these types of engines. Next slide, please. So getting into our concept, what we want to do is we want to have implement some kind of in-use program for the off-road, especially when we implement new standards, lower standards at Tier 5. We want to ensure that the emissions benefits are maintained throughout the real use of the vehicle. We want to have a program that minimizes costs and ensures accurate data submission. And usually those two things are at ends, but we think with a multi-phase approach, it would allow us to screen a large number of volumes of sold engines in California here, using ECU and sensor data at a lower cost compared to full-on PEMS testing. But if necessary, we would have the accuracy to do PEMS testing if deemed necessary. And PEMS are known to be an accurate measure of real-world operations. PEMS testing would only be triggered if the screening process from the ECU or sensors data suggested higher emissions. And we'll go over a proposal of what the screening criteria could be in the next few slides. Right now, we're targeting engines greater than 56 kilowatts. We think this is our range of interest currently because for our proposal, we think these engines should have selective catalyst reduction after treatment technologies. They should, and then to control those, they would already have NOx sensors and slightly more advanced ECUs on their systems. Next slide, please. Right, so what would be involved in this sensors program, in the phase one, the sensors program? So manufacturers would submit annual summary report of the sensors, ECU, or something like off-road real emissions assessment logging, similar to what's done in the on-road currently. The proposal that we're going to talk about here borrows a lot from the elements implemented for in-use vehicle emissions reporting that's in the extended durability program from the recent omnibus, if anyone is familiar with that. We expect the data for the sensors program to be collected with telematics. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a flow chart for our concept. In step one, there would be ECU or sensors data screening. Manufacturers would annually submit 75% of California engine sales per engine family. And this emissions data would be binned into low idle, low load, and high load bins. The Carb staff would review reports for high emitters for each bin. And if the engine family raises no alerts, then the in-use testing requirements for the year would be fulfilled. And you can stop at step one. However, if there's an engine family flagged for high emissions, then you'd have to go to step two, the off-cycle emission testing with PEMS. This would involve testing of engines, anything between 5 to 10 engines, depending on how the testing goes and how the emissions are. If there's a compliance determined, then the in-use testing requirements for the year would be fulfilled, and you can stop there. If not, The final step is a corrective action if a non-compliance is found with the PEMS testing. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, the target is to send 75% of PI California certified engines sold for each engine family in California. And the manufacturer must submit all data collected, even if it's above the 75% of sales, as long as it was collected. These reports will not be required for any engines exceeding their useful life. And staff would use this information to screen for engine families based on the bin emissions greater than twice the standards of for the applicable bin, the low load or the non-transient cycle. Currently we're evaluating how to handle an idle bin or idle type emissions for our program. Next slide, please. So what would be reported? Reports would include main elements like the engine family name, the sales volume for this particular engine family, the rated power ranges, engine serial numbers and engine runtime hours, and the date of collection for each engine. If we have an off-road reel program, the off-road reel program we're still looking into, and we have contracts going out to see which parameters would be most useful for the off-road applications. Tables 1 and 2 here are examples from the on-road reel program of the parameters and the binning structure. It may not be exactly like this for the off-road program, but this is to get an idea. In table 1 are the different parameters we're interested, such as like the mass emissions of NOx at the exit of the engine, and we're also interested in the mass of NOx emissions at the tailpipe, and the difference between the two is, how effective is the after treatment at cleaning up the exhaust. We need to know the engine output energy, engine runtime hours, and the fuel consumptions. Excuse me. And then so all of these parameters we would collect for each of the bins. And the bins are here in table 2. Again, this is just a hypothetical example from on we're still looking at the bin structure for off-road, and we'll be requesting feedback for that as well. Next slide, please. So when would manufacturer off-road PEMS testing be required? For each engine family selected, when would it be required? So we would take the NOx sensors data, and for each engine family that we select, and for all those reports, we would be evaluating NOx importantly, and then we would be evaluating on low load bins and the high bins, and comparing that with the NRTC, the non-road transient cycle. The criteria would be if 20% or more of the reports from the engine family have events in any bin with emissions greater than 2 times the emission standard, then the engine manufacturer would be required to conduct on-road in-use testing with PEMS. And that's step 2 that we mentioned. Next slide, please. This would be the proposed pass and failure criteria when conducting in PEMS. And then there's a lot of similar structure here with the on-road in-use testing programs. But we're still in development. We're currently interested in using a similar binned moving average windows methodology as the on-road program. What this would involve is we would start with 5 engines of testing with PEMS, and if those 5 engines pass, then the engine family passes and you can stop testing it. But if one of them fails, so you would have to do an additional 1 test. And if that 1 test passes, so you would have 5 out of 6 tests pass, then your whole engine family would pass with compliance and you can stop testing. However, if the 6 engine tested failed, so 2 out of 6 fail, you'd have to test 4 more engines to a total of 10. Anything less than 8 engines passing would be considered as an engine non-compliance. And if there's a non-compliance, corrective action would be required. Additionally, there may be additional PEMS testing 2 to 4 years down the line to ensure that the corrective actions were effective. Next slide, please. Since our last workshop, we had heard a lot of feedback about the testing challenges associated around PEMS. One of the items is the connections to off-road equipment varies a lot by manufacturer, and so does the data stream protocol. So it's hard to download the data from the ECU with a single tool, and oftentimes it's proprietary and requires a lot of creativity. One of the ways we're hoping to handle this in the Tier 5 rulemaking is to have requirements for standardized connections and standardized data protocols for ease of use throughout the wide variety of applications in off-road. Another comment we hear a lot is the location for mounting off-road equipment, mounting PEMS on the off-road equipment, and safety considerations to go along with that. A challenge we hear is there's no passenger seats as there is in off-road, and it's very difficult to put a PEMS on off-road equipment. After talking with experts in testing staff, they currently have at Carb, they currently have had no equipment that they couldn't test. However, creative solutions are necessary, such as mounting on the roofs, using special harnesses or bolt down methods to secure the PEMS unit for safety. We had heard sometimes the webbing straps are not safe enough, but we have examples of alternative methods that are safe, such as the special harnesses and maybe bolting down of the PEMS units. Even for extremely small off-road engines where the PEMS is around the similar size, or the off-road equipment is even smaller than the PEMS units, they have found ways to attach PEMS and follow it along with like a golf cart or a small follow cart to measure the emissions. We have also heard comment from industry that vibration and impact resistance are a big problem. Currently, Carb staff has not found this to be a major issue, but we'll require and request more information from the forces experienced during testing to inform our response on this in the future. Slide, please. All right, so we're requesting feedbacks on everything here that we've mentioned on our proposal and our concepts for in use. We want to hear if there's any alternative manufacturer run type programs that we should be considering. We want to hear if there's questions or concerns about the power category and equipment type applicability than what we have mentioned here. Would a sensors-based program be attractive to industry? And do they have any concerns regarding that? we need feedback on defining the bins for the sensor reporting. Is there any feedback on the standardization of ECU communication, as we had mentioned? Feedback on the OBD on-road real emissions assessment logging program for the off-road sensors program here. Is there any feedback to give us on the in-use emissions data evaluation? How should we calculate the emissions with the data we have? And is there any additional comments or feedback for PEMS testing of the off-road equipment for the off-cycle emissions testing? And then any other comments related to the topics that we discussed today? Next slide, please. Oh, okay, that concludes my presentation, and we'll be opening it up to questions and comments from the audience. Again, the information is here for those calling in. For everyone on the Zoom meeting, you're able to raise your hand or use the Q&A feature on Zoom.
So we did get about 4 questions in the Q&A. Muslim, if you want to start by reading those off.
Sure, yes. The first question is, the 75% of the cells concern the cell in California or all the cells of the engine with EO, slide number 11.
So this would be the 75% of the engine families certified and sold here in California. Sorry. For each engine family, it's 75% of the sales volume of those certified engines certified and sold in California.
Okay.
Show that slide so people understand the question. Can you?
Oh, yes.
I think it's slide 9. Yep.
Oh, yes. Maybe slide 9 has more detail.
The question says slide 11, but
okay, yes, slide
11.
Slide 11. It's the top line there.
Yeah.
So it's 75% of engine sales for each engine family, and applying to California only sold engines.
Yeah. Next question from Kevin Brown. A clarification per slide 11. Do you mean 75% of cells per engine family, or do you mean data for engine families representing 75% of California cells?
I think we mean the first one. So for each family, it'd be 75% of those, 75% of those engines for each engine family.
75% of California sales, right?
Yes, only in California. So we're talking about California certified engines, because these engines would be subject to Tier 5 standards, and that may or may not be different from the federal standards. So yes, we're only talking about California.
Okay. Next question, does off-road include locomotive and marine? Jeff, please answer this question.
Sure, thank you, Muslim. For the purposes of the Tier 5 rulemaking, only land-based diesel off-road engines are subject. The only exception to that currently is that marine propulsion diesel engines less than 50 horsepower, at least in California, are still governed to the same standards, the same Tier 4 standards. That will likely change in Tier 5. But yeah, only off-road land-based diesel engines are subject to the Tier 5 rulemaking and to the subject to today's presentation.
Next question, is Carb off-road engine different than EPA non-road engine? Jeff, please.
Sure, I'll take that one too. Technically, if it's certified as a 50-state engine family, the engine is the same. There may be different labeling requirements that go on the engine. There may be different in-use requirements for the engine, but technically, mechanically, it's the same engine. They meet the same standards. That could change in Tier 5. If California adopts standards that EPA does not adopt, then the engines would be different. But for now, they're pretty much the same.
Thank you, Jeff. Next question, can we get the slide afterwards? Kim, would you please answer this question?
Oh yeah, so just so folks know, the slides are provided on our website, and I typed the link into there. And of course, if anyone has trouble accessing that, we can email them to you separately, but take a look at that link, please.
Thank you, Kim. Next question, how would the ECU sensor-based data be collected? Christian, can you answer this question?
Christian, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. So how the ECU sensors-based data would be collected. We expect this to be collected. We're hearing from industry that a lot of, especially in the higher power categories, these engines already have telematics capability. So in this program, we're expecting to leverage that technology, and the ECU sensors data would be telematically transmitted to the manufacturers, and they would then collect that data and then report it to Carb. And we're still working on formats for data submission. And we're also working on the OBD real program, as we had seen in the previous slides, or what parameters are most important, and the binning structure that would be most beneficial for the off-road Tier 5 program.
Next question, some equipment manufacturers don't manufacture their own engines. Who will be held responsible by Carp for off-road in-use testing? Only the engine manufacturer or engine and equipment manufacturer? Christian, can you take that one too?
Sure. Similar to the on-road side, the party who's most important for compliance and the standards, since these are engine-based standards, would be the engine manufacturers. So, for example, they would be putting on the sensors and the telematics equipment. So they would be downloading the sensors data. In the case for PEMS testing, if it's necessary, they would usually contact fleets and then request for the ability to do testing on their equipment during their normal operation. Yes, so in total, it relies mostly on the engine manufacturer side and not the vehicle manufacturer side, if there's a split between the two.
Why don't we take the question hand that's raised right now?
Sure.
Do they unmute themselves, Muslim, or?
No, I
Okay.
sorry, I allowed them to talk. This question is from, sorry if I pronounce your name not correctly, but Janggu Kim. Please introduce yourself, unmute, and ask your question.
Hello, Mr. Kim. If you'd like to ask your question verbally, please do so now.
Yes.
You can unmute yourself at the bottom of the screen in the lower left-hand corner, because we can't hear you right now. Okay, why don't we come back to him and continue. There he is. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Kim.
Hello.
Hello.
This is Mr. Kim. I have one question. You mentioned the emission data would be binned into idle and low load and high load bins. If so, ECU should memorize the full emission data during the full useful life?
Yes, so if we go to slide 13, again, this is an example of the on-road real program, and we're hoping something similar would be implemented for the off-road side. So in table 1, the different column there has different like storage arrays for the parameters that we're interested in. So there would be like a real-time, or the first column there is the active 100-hour array. So that would continually accumulate the data from the parameters for up to 100 hours. And after you reach 100 hours worth of that data, it goes into like a stored 100 hours bin. So that's kind of like a recent complete snapshot of how the engine emissions work is doing. And then as this, steps upgrades, like the next 100 hours happens, the first bin would move to the second, and what was there in the 100-hour stored array would move to a lifetime array. And so, it would be constantly updating this lifetime array. So that's very similar to what you're talking about, storing data, but it wouldn't be storing 1 hertz data for the entire engine. It would be, saving it in the average in these arrays and then stored in the lifetime. The difference between the last 2 columns, the lifetime array and the lifetime engine activity array, is in the lifetime array and the previous 2, the sensors are on. So NOx sensors are only on when it's warm enough. And this is part of the protection for NOx sensors. So during cold start or extremely wet conditions, they deactivate. And in the last column, the engine lifetime array, we're requesting the data, whether the sensors were on or off. And, there's a not available exact parameter there for the NOx mass, but the other parameters that we're interested in will be available throughout the entire life of the vehicle.
Thank you, Christian. Next question, Georges Farah, please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so I come back to the 75% of sales. So let's say that EPA and Carb will have the same tier 5 requirements, and the engine has both certificates. So then the engine family, the 75 of engine family, then it would be the sales only in California, or for example, all the US that should be collected and sent to Carb?
Oh, that's a good question. So currently, so if we imagine that there was harmonization for Carb and EPA at this time, and EPA did include like the similar requirement for 75% of the sales for each engine family, then it would be based on the nationwide sales. However, if there isn't harmonization at that time, it would be required the 75% of California sales.
Okay, and let's say if the engine, for example, is sold, for example, in Europe with an EO of California, then this would count as a part of the whole percentage of the whole number that should be counted or not?
Currently, I don't think it should apply to engines sold outside of the United States. Like I think we had mentioned here in the slides, this would apply to the 75% applies to engine families certified to California, but also sold in California.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Now we are going back to Q&A. And then we go back to raise hand again. So next question, you mentioned a PEMS test 2-4 years after the original test if it passes. What happens if it fails at the later date? Do all previously sold engines require changes?
I think so. Maybe I could ask a little bit help from our actual in-use compliance from Sharon, but I'll start what I believe the answer to be. So yes, like if correction action was made down the line, there was additional testing and it was found that it was non-compliant, then there may be needs for a second corrective action to get it into compliance.
I think we'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis to see whether it was a carryover. So, but that's a good question. Thank you for bringing that up.
Next question, can you say anything about feedback you may have with respect to impacts of dust or dirt and also engine heat rejection on PEMS equipment?
I can take that. We have a end-use compliance section right now who's doing a lot of PEMS testing of off-road equipment. And I don't think that they've had any issues with impacts of dust or dirt or engine heat rejection that we've heard of. But if you want to send us a comment and provide data where you've had that type of that type of effect when you've done PEMS testing, we'd like to look at that.
I'd like to note on the on-road PEMS testing side, or at least what's adopted in the omnibus regulation is they've added requirements for PEMS environmental enclosures, so that to protect the PEMS from various environmental elements such as just the temperature outside to vibration. This enclosure would also help to have the PEMS away from dust and dirt as mentioned here. And again, these enclosures are climate controlled, so it could help prevent any possible impacts from the heat rejection from the engines.
Thank you. Next question, if this follows the HDIM remote telematics monitoring model, will telematics equipment be required as a standard equipment, or will customers be required to add telematic equipment? Yes. Kim or Jeff, would you like to answer this question?
Hi, yeah, it's a good question. It's something that we'll take under advisement. We'll have further discussions on, but it seems reasonable that it would be required. The equipment would be required to have the capability to broadcast the telematics if we go this route with our in-use compliance program.
We've actually heard that a lot of the equipment already has telematics on it, so we'd like to hear your feedback on that, and particularly what power ratings it does or does not have.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question. When Carp was performing off-highway PEMS testing, was that with equipment being used by an end user on a job? If not, what was the environment they were tested in? Would Carp be able to share photos of their installations? Any of the panelists would like to answer this question?
Sure. The Carb staff testing here, they were not tested by the end users of the job. These are either rented or procured vehicles by Carb and testing using simulated work. I think I'll have to get back to you, Frank, on if we can share these pictures. I think it's possible to be able to share them.
I think that what we've heard from our in-use compliance folks at Carb is that it's been done by both an end user on a job and by Carb staff. So I think we have given presentations publicly that show how the PEMS was installed on a job that we can probably share. We can get back with you on that.
Thank you. Just a comment, please, when you type your answer in Q&A box or when you're talking during the raise hand, please state your affiliation and your company. I appreciate that. Next question. What if telematics are not available for a machine, or if the machine is in a location without any remote connectivity?
Yeah, we understand that it's difficult to get all pieces of equipment's telematics data. You know, some agricultural equipment definitely is way out there. It may not have sources. That's one of the reasons why we didn't propose initially 100% of California engines sold and certified. We're still trying to figure out, and so we're requesting feedback on, you know, Jen mentioned earlier, what percentage of current engines already have telematics, and what power categories they're in to better understand who has telematics or which equipment has telematics currently or does not have it, so we can take that into consideration.
Thank you, Christian. Next question. Can you share the slide with the required data that would need to be submitted on 75% of EF cells in California?
Yeah, that's currently the slide 13. Again, this is not exactly what we have for off-road. This is an example of from on-road applications, the on-road reel. We're still looking into which parameters would be most effective and which bins would be most effective. We have contracts for that, but we are also requesting feedback on that topic.
Next question. How would we determine the engines to be tested in the step 2 field testing process? That's a question mark. Is field testing process?
Yeah. In step 2, engines would go to like the field testing with PEMS. If they had showed through the screening process that there was a non-compliance, and could you scroll down on the slides, please?
Which slide? Sorry.
Maybe on slide 14. Okay. So if we have the 75% of all those engines sailed and certified in California, if we receive the data, and when we look at that 20% or more of those reports that we receive have a non-compliant, like a higher emitter, then we would send that to PEMS testing. So what decides if a particular engine is a high emitter is if the bin emissions are 2 times greater than the standard for, I know the standard is not set, but we currently have targets for reducing emissions in the high load and what the low load cycle and that standard will be. So it's based on twice the emission standard, depending on which bin we're talking about.
Next question, gaseous and PEMS testing are based upon step 1. You may require to do either gaseous or PM or both, question mark. It's asking you may require to do either gaseous or PM or both.
If PEMS testing was required, like after the screening process in step 1, we would expect the PEMS testing to include all criteria pollutants, based on the current like technology and limited availability of onboard sensors. Here we're talking about NOx in phase 1, but in phase 2 it'd be all criteria pollutants.
Thank you. Next question. How would you propose?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
It says you may require to do either gaseous or PEMS, but or PM. We may consider PM, Christian.
Gaseous.
Yeah, it says either gaseous or PM or both. I think we're interested in hearing your feedback. I think for PEMS, we'd probably require PM in addition to NOx.
Yeah, that's right. So like, all 5 criteria pollutants. So it would require the PM side.
Right. So that for the
if there's AVL sensor. Yeah.
Yes. So for the sensor program, it would be NOx, and then if you got put in, if you found a non-compliance, then it wouldn't be even a non-compliance. You just didn't pass the screening. Then you'd go to PEMS, and for the PEMS testing, then it would be the full criteria pollutants. Just wanted to make that clear.
Oh, thank you for clarifying, Jenna.
Next question. How would you propose we address an issue where customer refused the collection of data on the piece of equipment? Current DEF verification activities, we had only 35% of our customers willing to let us collect data on their machine.
Oh, that's interesting. We'd definitely like to hear more about that and feedback regarding that. I think we have the current assumption that maybe telematics is kind of like an automatic and data collection, and it doesn't require like physical contact with the owners. But I think we'll also look into this more. Jenna, did you have more to add on this topic?
Yeah, I guess we'd want to get more information on that, and also I know that in the China program that they are collecting OBD data telematically, and that's a requirement. And so that's something that we're looking at really closely. So, that's what we're basing some of our assumptions on. But in terms of the telematically collected data, that's from US and California equipment. So. We've taken note of that. Thank you.
At this moment, we are going to answer for the raise hand. Mr. Kevin Brown, please unmute yourself and please state your affiliation. Introduce yourself. Thank you. You can unmute.
Hi, Kevin Brown with Mika. And I've got a question in the Q&A, but I thought it'd be better just to raise my hand and ask it. This is just from past experience in off-road that you can get manufacturers that have low volume sales, and you need to consider how you would treat low volume sales, because in the occurrence of having to test 75% or get data for 75% of your sales in an engine family, the manufacturer only sold 3, 75% would essentially be all 3, because 2 out of 3 is only 66%. You get into issues too where those machines might be located outside an area where telematics can get the data. So you can end up then having to physically send someone to sites to collect the data. The machines also can end up getting moved out of state. They might be in the state for a couple of years and they end up getting moved to Nevada or Oregon. And anyways, just on the low volume side, to consider what would be reasonable allowances so that manufacturers aren't. I assume manufacturers are going to come to you with these types of questions, but that is a big deal in off-road, that not all machines are located where they'll be accessible by telematics.
Thank you, Kevin. That you're right. This will be very important. We require. I'm sorry, not we require. We're requesting definitely feedback for industry on this element of low sales volume. We may include this on the off-road side, but in on-road in-use requirements, there is like a minimum sales volume for when we're talking about engine families in on-road for testing, and so we might want to think about a similar, not exactly their number, but something that might make sense for off-road. So
right, and depending what that number is, what is it? What does it mean with respect to 75%? Like if it was, just to say it was 6 units and 75% is 4.5, do you go up or do you go down?
Yeah. We would need to have maybe a decision matrix based on what's the, the cutoff engine volume sales size would be, and then what would make sense. On the other part you mentioned for maybe engines that left California, I'm currently thinking that, we're interested in, because we're interested in the emission benefits for California, like we would be interested in also California, only engine equipment operating in California that fits into the sold in California and certified to California.
So it's just common with off-road that you will get machines that get moved around and get moved in and out of the state. They might be owned by a California fleet, but they're used in construction projects all over the place. And we've had, just personally in the past, had to send someone out to Nevada and Oregon to recover data logging equipment because the machines got moved. And, no one told the manufacturer they got moved.
Oh yeah, we've heard similar stories. For example, Carb before had a retrofit. So when we talk about retrofit for diesel engines, like for diesel, adding a DPF on, I believe it was off-road equipment, maybe almost 10 years ago, and we were monitoring those with telematics. And we were surprised to see that one of those pieces of equipment ended up in Saudi Arabia. But yeah, you're right. It's important. We'd like to hear from those types of manufacturers. If their equipment is traveling in and out, or because that fleet has like equipment moving in and out of California, we'd be kind of interested to know, probably in their report, maybe what age of time it's operated in California for that specific type of case. But like I mentioned, especially for manufacturers or fleet owners that are running into like their equipment traveling because work needs to be done in other places for that business, we want to hear like how much of that is probably going on and how we might account for it. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Christian. Mr. Charles Closer, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm this is Charles Closer from John Deere. I asked a question about the really focused around customer privacy, and comparing the situation of the U.S. to China is probably a little bit unfair. I mean, we view customer privacy as being something that's paramount. So to say that you're going to use China as a reference for the 75% seems a little like flawed logic. We really need to really go out and do assessments of what is the customers willing to accept us collecting that PEMS data, including GPS and pieces of equipment location, and whether we have the legal right to insist on that data to be collected. I think we need to proceed very carefully in that space, and that's something that I'd recommend that Carb takes a really close legal look at on what can and can't be done. 75% is a very high bar, and I guess I'm concerned that bar is just set too high at this point. I'm not against collecting the real data. It's just that 75% bar seems awful high.
All right, thank you so much for your comment. I appreciate that. And we will take a good look, and we hear you loud and clear. And also, if you wanted to make a suggestion on what you think an alternative to 75%, we're interested in hearing that as well, Charles.
Yeah, I guess I would encourage some flexibility in the rulemaking and kind of come up with some kind of flexibility. You know, when you put a hard percentage down, that kind of creates a potential friction point where we may not be able to meet that threshold.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So please lower your hand when you ask your question. Mr. Farah, do you have more questions? Because I see you have a raised hand.
Hello, sorry. Yeah, I don't have, I wrote a question in the chat, but yeah, my hand was raised since the last time.
Okay.
So maybe I can ask it, or
why don't we take some more questions in the Q&A chat instead, because you already had your turn once, and we want to make sure we get to those people who've been waiting in the queue. But thank you, and we'll come back to you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Let's continue on with just the Q&A, Muslim, for now, and then we'll take more hand raised after we finish this.
Thank you. Next question, how often does the data need to be reported to Carp?
In our concept, we had mentioned on an annual basis.
Okay,
so every year, yes.
Thank you so much. Next question, how to filter out AECD event like NOx sensor adaptation where EO and TP need to be equal for a short while up to engine supplier or Carb and a flag event?
I think that's a interesting point. I think we need to, we're still looking at which parameters and which bins, and if necessary, like a bin similar to the NTE. So in slide 13, on table 2 there's, you know, a special bins on the bottom right for NTE and regeneration. If you have more detailed feedback, we can look into, you know, how it might be binned separately if there's concerns for AC events. But the long averaging times, you know, 100 hours or the full lifetime that we're looking into, ACD should be an extremely small fraction. But if you have feedback on, you know, your engine family actually uses the ACD very often, we like to set up a meeting and hear more feedback and more detail on that kind of a situation.
Thank you. Next question. Can you clarify the info on slide 10? Data reports are not required for engines that exceed their useful life. Are there any expected compliance items required for the engine after the useful life is complete? Slide 10.
Yes. So, you know, engines have a useful life in terms of maybe hours of operation in on-road. It's also based on mileage and the age of the equipment. The compliance, or at least emissions compliance, is limited on, would be only limited to the useful life. So whatever the max is, or whatever the minimum cutoff, like if your engine equipment reaches the maximum useful life by any of those methods, whether it's the hours of operation, mileage doesn't apply here, or the age of the equipment, that would limit the equipment that would need to be reported on. Anything older than that is kind of outside the scope. Jenna, I think, might have more comment on this.
No, I just wanted to correct you, and you did correct yourself that it's based on hours, not mileage.
Oh, yes.
For off-road, but you self-corrected, so thank you. And yeah, we're just the program is just through useful life.
Next question: how the bin limits will be determined for above 560 kilowatts category?
We're still looking into how the bin structure and also the parameters would be structured for these extremely large horsepower applications. We'd like to hear more feedback, or if you have suggestions. This is maybe an item we'll take back when and think about when developing the parameters and binning structure.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Now I realize it's an 100-hour average per bin, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So at least in this example here from on-road, there's 100-hour averages and also lifetime averages. We would be interested in both of those columns. So the recently stored 100-hour average would be kind of like a recent snapshot of how the equipment's been doing, and then we're also interested over the much longer time frame of its entire lifetime. But yes, the 100-hour category is one of the categories we're looking at.
Your next question. When would the proposed changes to the current ORUC program be implemented?
I can take this one.
Oh yeah, go ahead,
if
please.
you want, Christian.
Yes.
Hello. Yes. We're trying to figure out when these requirements would take effect. So what we're thinking of is we're going, as we mentioned before, we're going to the board to present our proposal in the 2024-25 timeframe, and then with implementation of the regs in 28-29 timeframe. In terms of when this in-use testing program would take effect, especially with telematics and other concerns, it may not be exactly in 2028 when the rulemaking takes effect. So we may end up providing more time. It could be a year or so. We'd like to hear feedback from folks on that, but we're thinking initially that it wouldn't be in 2028 when the reg becomes final.
Thank you. Next question. How do you define low load operation? Is this defined by when the regen cycle of the SCR turns on, of the noun setting when the wet stacking starts occurring?
Currently, we're working on a low load cycle, and what we mean by low load is the lower power outputs of the engine. We have one of our lead staff working on development of a low load cycle similar to what was done in on-road for the omnibus program. We're seeing a lot of portion from the data that we have and we are receiving. We're noting that there's a lot of operation in lower loads, at lower power loads than the average power on the non-road transient cycle. So the low load cycle for off-road is currently being developed with the data that we have. I don't have like an exact number, but it's, you know, kind of based on power operation and, you know, maybe a moving average of that power operation is what places it into those bins.
Thank you. Next.
Yeah, I'm from my chat that Yitan, the lead staff on that. We don't currently have we haven't put out or defined the cutoff at this point for the low load cycle.
Thank you. Next question. Hello, thanks for the presentation. How are low volume engine families considered? Reporting percentage and PEMS testing, etc. Also, should PEMS testing be required? Is there a duty on the owner to allow access to the machine?
Yes. So part of this is similar to Kevin Brown's question earlier on low sales volume. So, you know, we'd like to hear more from the manufacturers and maybe the fleet owner side about their experience, like with these low volume machines or equipment. And in terms of PEMS testing, I don't think the fleet owners or the owners are operated to hand over their equipment to do PEMS testing. In the on-road heavy duty in-use testing program with PEMS, you know, manufacturers go out and look for engines that meet the engine family criteria that was requested for testing, and they have to ask, you know, permission and whether or not these owners would allow PEMS testing during their normal operation. So in short, no, the owners are not required to allow access, but manufacturers would request or ask, you know, on a case-by-case basis if they had to do the PEMS testing.
Thanks. Next question. Some engines are manufactured by a certain company, but then the equipment manufacturer has the engine certified with a Carb EO that is in their name. For example, Perkins manufactures an engine for CAT, but the emission label and Carb EO lists CAT as the manufacturer. Who will be responsible for testing in these situations?
Oh, it would be definitely the manufacturer who's listed on the EO. That is, who is, you know, on the hook for making sure these engines are operating properly. In this case, I imagine that CAT would have to go to Perkins on, you know, how to make them in compliance if there was any kind of problem like that. I don't know if anyone else had feedback. Anyone from Carb had additional say on this kind of special situation.
Okay, next question. Since sensor screening is only focused on NOx, will PEMS testing also only be for NOx, or will measurement of emissions be included in PEMS like HCPM, etc.?
The sensors program is, like you mentioned, there on NOx only, and that's just based on the availability of, you know, sensors currently available. However, we're still interested in the emissions of all the criteria pollutants. So in the case of PEMS testing, it would be required to do all the criteria pollutants for PEMS testing, like you're mentioning there, hydrocarbon, PM, NOx, CO.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question. Annual report of the ECU sensors result is current year value or cumulative value. Which one?
Yes. We're thinking that the engine families carry crossover multiple years. This would be a cumulative value. This wouldn't be only particularly for that year it's sold and the sensors data for that year. We're interested in the long term and up to useful life. So it would be cumulative. So, the second year of reporting would include that year's sales and the previous and so on down the line for, as long as that engine family is out there.
Thank you. Next question is Bay Area AQMD. I'm wondering if anything is going to be proposed for less than 56 kilowatt engines. There is a large equipment inventory in the state below 75 kilowatts, which might be missed by not having anything applied to them.
Jeff and John, can you help me with this? I know some of those engines are preempted and the federal laws kind of supersede on those topics.
Right. That's a good point, Christian. Farm and construction under 175 horsepower is preempt from California control. So a lot of these engines would be preempt. So if EPA did not have a similar requirement, there would be no requirement for the preempt engines. In addition to that, we're also considering other programs that would require zero emission equipment less than 19 kilowatts, and that may even extend above that in compliance with Executive Order E7920. The smaller power engines tend to be the sweet spot when it comes to electrification feasibility. So we thought 56 would be a good cutoff point, but we are certainly open to suggestions why we should go lower if it indeed makes sense. Thank you.
And just to add on to this, I think we had selected the range for horsepower rating for the in-use to be above 56 kilowatt. And our thinking at this point was because right now, less than 56 does not have SCR on it. And so that was some of our thinking, and we'd like to hear more from you if you think otherwise.
Thank you. Next question. Are you considering any low volume exemption for products that may sell very few units per year and therefore have very small field populations?
Yes, we're similar questions were mentioned before. We'd like to hear more feedback on, small sales volumes and, what kind of a cutoff would make sense for that. We'll probably go back and maybe with certification data, if there's sales volume internally we have, we might look into that. So what would make sense for a small volume sales?
Yeah, but we'd like to hear more from you about what you think the cutoff should be for low sales volume. We'd be very interested in hearing that. And we've had this question multiple times now, so we can see that it's something that's of concern, and so we'd like to hear feedback as well.
Thank you.
And it's a possibility that we could do tiers for implementing this. So love to hear your suggestions.
The next question, which actually is a comment from Bay Area AQMD. My understanding is telematics collection data is pretty common on new equipment to make sure warranties are not being violated. I'm not an engine manufacturer though.
Yeah, we've heard similar comments. Again, we'd like to hear more information from the manufacturers on, how much of their equipment by the power category already has telematics. We'd like to also know, what percentage doesn't have telematics, like to account for this change and how impactful it would be to add telematics to have this kind of program functional.
Thank you. Next question, should we test the same engines that show emission more than 2 times the standards, or the choice of the machines to test is given to the manufacturer?
I see. That's actually a good question, since I think what George is saying is if they have the telematics data available, they actually know which engines have that 2 times standard in, and whether or not they should test those specific engines that were actually flagged, or are they allowed to test other engines in that pool. I think we would probably need to take that question. That my initial thought is, that would be an excellent idea to test the engines that were shown flag, and possibly with PEMS testing we could see why.
Yeah, I agree, Christian, that we'd like to. We have to flesh out the concept a bit more, and these questions are great. Ideally, we'd like to see that engine PEMS tested if possible. That's not always the case, so we're going to have to think about that a little bit more and figure out what language we would use in case you're not able to access that engine for testing.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you. Next question. If step 1 fails due to some specific application or use profile, would it be acceptable to have a step 2 PEMS tests on different application from same engine family?
Similar to the previous question, we would definitely need to flesh out these special conditions. An initial response, or my initial thoughts on seeing this is, if a specific application is failing, that's really what we're interested in looking on with PEMS. Sorry, if something is flagged with sensors, it's not necessarily in noncompliance. If something is flagged, that's the type of application we want to see more about it with the detailed PEMS testing. To see data on a different application would seems like it would be kind of circumventing what we're really going for. But we would still need to go back and look at what kind of provisions and language for these special cases. Thank you. These are important things for us to think about.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Chad Grugel, FPT Industrial. What is the basis for requiring 75% of volumes to make an assessment on NOx? Would results from outside of California on the same certified configuration be acceptable?
The original thought for 75%, previously, our goals, we would like 100%. Like for telematics reasons, or equipment being outside of what's available to have telematics, we had stepped that down to 75. We of course want to hear feedback on if industry disagrees for additional reasons, and why might that be their proposal for maybe a different value than 75%. On the question for results from outside California, let's say they were certified to California, but it's operating outside, would that be acceptable? That's interesting. We're always interested in data. Previously we had mentioned, what would be required is at least California sold, California certified, and California operated. But I think we need a go back with the group and think about, would this be also acceptable additional equipment operating outside?
Thank you. Next question. Exempted engines are up to 175 horsepower. If I recall correctly, per the presentation, PEMS will be conducted on engines above 56 kilowatts to 73 horsepower or 73 horsepower. If EPA does not harmonize, how will engines in the 73 to 175 horsepower range be managed?
Oh, I see. So it's not exactly all all engines that are, less than 175. It's also 175, and I believe it's also agricultural. It has to be agricultural equipment. And was there, I don't know if Jeff or Jenna can help me, was there another category?
Farm and construction under 175 horsepower. You're right, Christian.
Yeah. So, equipment that's, greater than 56, but also outside of farm and construction would be applicable to our proposal.
Thank you, Christian. Next question, due to privacy, would we have to anonymize the data? For example, no machine or engine serial number, only the engine family information?
We'll probably have to go internally and discuss a topic like this for the engine serial number. Yeah, I don't have an exact number. I had previously thought on road for their in-use testing program that the engine serial number was included as part of that report, but I might need to go back and look at what the current requirements for on-road is in their PEMS testing, and then we'll probably need to also circle back with legal for privacy information on elements like that then. Thank you, Xavier.
Okay, there is another comment here. Our customers also do not allow us to collect telematics data from the machines. The customer considers the data about the machine their information, not the manufacturer's.
Thanks for that comment. We're taking that down.
Next question, according to 14 page, if NOx emission is greater than 2 times the emission standard, the engine manufacturer would be required to conduct ORUT with PEMS. Is the NOx emission from NOx sensor or dyno engine test data? As you know, the NOx sensor has a tolerance. Does Carb have any plan to compensate its tolerance? The tier 5 NOx limit is too low for LLAC and NRTC.
That's something that we'll need to go back and look into. We're also evaluating newer technology NOx sensors that might be able to very accurately measure at these temperature ranges. This is also one of the reasons why the NOx sensor program is really a screening program, and compliance is not determined. That's why we would require PEMS testing for a compliance determination.
But in answering his question, it says, does the NOx emission from the is the NOx emissions from the NOx sensor or the dyno engine test data? And right now, as we've conceived it, it's from the NOx sensors.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Misread. Thank you, Jen, for clarifying.
Of course.
Next comment. Engine manufacturers do not necessarily know California directed sales for some equipment OEM.
the tracking of their engines and where they're used, and if it's certified for here, in the case of the tier 5, it's likely it's going to be used here, but that's like one of the logistic trails that they may need to include in their programs to handle like our proposed in-use testing here for them.
Thank you. Next question. This is 75% cells not operating in California, correct?
The proposal is for 75% of California certified, California sold, operating in California. So it would be operating in California. Only the ones operating in California would be required. We'll look into if data from outside California would be allowable, as mentioned in one of the previous questions. But currently the requirement is only the California operating one.
Yeah, I think that just thinking about it, if EPA does not harmonize with California, then they're going to have different standards in California. And so I guess that would be difficult to then use data from outside California if they're not certified to the California standard. If they're certified to the California standard, then that seems like it would be more reasonable. Next question. Muslim, you're on mute if you're reading.
Oh, sorry, just.
No worries.
I'm actually going to the raise hand. Mr. Closet, do you have, I guess you have one more question, please.
Yeah, I got a quick question. So
sure.
The expectation is on a annual basis, we're collecting 100 hours of, I'm assuming, 1 second or 1 hertz data. Is that correct? It's only 100 hours of data, or are we collecting data continuously? What is the expectation that from that perspective?
Can we go to slide 13? This is how it's the real program is handled for on-road. So yes, we would have like the first rate would be, or the manufacturers would be collecting, 100 of the most recent hours of data, or up to 100. It would be, filling up that bin, this box, I mean, with 100 hours. And after you reach 100 hours, it would be stored 100 hours. So this is the second column. There would be a complete 100 hours worth of data, whereas the active one, you might be filling that up. So it might be like halfway there, or 20%, depending on the life cycle of this vehicle. And then additionally, outside of that, it stores the information for the lifetime. In these bins, it doesn't store the 1 hertz data, but it's really like accumulating. So when data is being added in, it's being added, in groups of hundreds to this array, and then this 100 of hours into the lifetime. So 1 hertz data is not stored, just large summed data for each parameter is placed into these bins.
Okay.
If that's clear.
Yeah, I was thinking more the telematics type, broadcasting back speed, load, and grams, and doing the calculations more on a PEMS equivalent kind of thought process. So the ECU is doing some calculations and determining what values it plops into the different bins is what the plan is here.
Yeah, yes, that's right. The ECU would be handling this communication. So this also, this constant stream, not constant stream, but these data are not reported, continuously via telematics. Maybe once a year, this telematics data would be sent. So we don't expect a huge strain on the data transfer also for the program. I think there was an estimate from for the on-road real program that it's around 2 kilobits of data to send the real data bins and parameters for a particular engine. So very small data transfer.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question from Q&A box. With regards to NOx mass calculation from sensor concentration, fuel manufacturers follow a predefined set of boundary conditions. Also, how will NOx be distinguished from ammonia and H3? Can we assume this would have to be distinguished in PEMS testing?
Yes, for the first part, predefined boundary conditions or calculations. We're still in development of the methods to calculate emissions, as well as like the collection of the parameters and how to bin them and the cutoffs. We don't have the details at this point, but later in the development and maturity of our proposal, those things would be better defined. Yes, so the second question is, how will NOx be distinguished from NH3? There are some NOx sensors available with I believe, technology on them to protect against the NH3 interference with NOx sensors. We're still looking into how much of this how much this is going to be of an interference, and any measures that need to be taken. We'd like to hear industry feedback on both the sensors manufacturer side and also engine manufacturers with comments to this topic.
Christian, I can add a little bit on that one.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, please, Tom.
Yes. Hi, this is Tom Montez with onboard diagnostic program with Carb. Regarding the question with regards to the NOx NOx concentrations and ammonia concentrations, we don't distinguish between those in the on-road real tracking program. We simply rely on the manufacturer to control the amount of ammonia concentrations at the tailpipe, and therefore the ratio of NOx to ammonia at the tailpipe would be result in minimal amount of ammonia being measured, so insignificant amount of ammonia being measured. The other question was, I think the other part of the question was, how does PEMS distinguish a NOx from ammonia? From my understanding, that is the PEMS analyzers are not subject to the same cross sensitivity as the NOx sensors on production vehicles are. So that they would be able to measure NOx concentration more directly. And was there, I think there was something about boundaries, right? The boundaries, they would only be defined for binning based on what power the engine is experiencing. And then another parameter, vehicle speed doesn't work as we have for on-road. So we'll have to use another parameter, power versus something like engine speed or something similar. So hopefully that addresses the question.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Next question. Next question, what's the definition of 20%? 20% of engines with over limit bin, or 20% of the total bins, or some other definition?
Sure. The limit would be 20% of the engines yeah, it's focusing on 20% of the engines that show like a high emission rate. And that high emission rate is defined by, twice the NOx standards for the particular bin. The initial reason why we have it kind of set around 20% is similar to what's already going on in the manufacturer on-road side for in-use testing. So for example, like, the first 5 engines are tested, and if 1 out of 5 shows failing for that particular test, that really sparks interest in testing to test more, like the one single engine, to get 6 tests. And even if you needed to test up to 10 engines, if that 6 had failed, the pass criteria is, it would need to be at least 8 of the engines pass out of 10. So, 1 out of 5 failing is a problem. And so that's 20%. And kind of similarly, the threshold, if you had to test 10 engines, is around is 20% also, 8 out of 10 engines. So well, we thought that is a suitable kind of like cutoff point for we should maybe look at this engine if 20% is reporting some kind of problem.
Thank you, Christian. Next question, Brad Ziegler, 44 Energy Technologies. Should the telematic data collection aspect for OEM reporting of ECM data be planned for the upcoming Tier 5 cost study, off-road emission control technology cost study diesel engine? Real was mentioned in the RFP, but the telematics collection of logged information is a notable aspect. This impacts individual pieces of equipment as well as the infrastructure to support telematics. Thanks. Jenna, would you please address this question?
Yes, thanks for the question, Brad. It's a good question, and it's something that we're giving thought to. So we'll have to think about this question and get back to you, and we can talk more about this.
Thank you, Jenna. Next question. Would PEMS testing to demonstrate or validate sensor-based emission accuracy be required?
I could do that one, Christian.
Sure, go ahead, Tom. Thank you.
I imagine we would take a similar approach that we have taken for the on-road rail program, in which the manufacturer does have to demonstrate in the laboratory, demonstrate correlation between the analyzer measured NOx emissions, compare that with the NOx sensor based NOx measurements, and fall within a certain tolerance for compliance with accuracy. And we did develop those thresholds based on existing sensor technology. And the thresholds we sent, we didn't feel like we were pushing any technology to its limit. We were well within the sensor technology itself. So I think we would plan a similar approach here for the off-road rail.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next question, will Carp define and or require a common data format when submitting reports? Jenna, please.
Yes, I think that we'll definitely have a common data format for submitting the reports, and that's something that we're actually working on the on-road program. And if you're familiar with that, it will likely be pretty similar, I imagine. But that's if you have any suggestions, please feel free to provide those to us.
Thank you. Next question. Any preliminary thoughts on EF flag threshold levels for PEM, 10 times NTE limit, like OBD thresholds or question mark? Christian, Tom, any of you, maybe?
I think that this is Jenna.
Yeah.
For let's see, it says, so I'm wondering if you're asking this about for the sensor program, for the sensor piece, and step one, we're envisioning that for NOx only, so there wouldn't be a PM threshold. And if you didn't pass that screening criteria, then you would go to PEMS, and then we'd have the standard would be the limit for PEMS for PM. And then also, I think you have 10 times the NTE standard. And based on our slides, we're looking at a moving average window to replace the NTE limit.
Thank you. Next question. What's an approximate equipment cost of the PEMS device utilized at Carb that measures all criteria pollutants, including PEM?
I'm not exactly 100% sure on the price on those. Let me see.
I think I can help you out with that, Christian.
Yeah.
We don't have an approximate equipment cost right now, but as part of the Tier 5 rulemaking process, we will do a full cost analysis that's part of the rulemaking and look at emission benefits and costs. But I don't have, we have looked into equipment costs for PEMS and because basically we're taking this from our on-road program. So we have a lot of familiarity with PEMS costs and have looked at it. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
Thank you. Next question. Would this program cover or replace the DEF verification requirements?
I think that's the DF verification.
Oh, sorry, DF.
Yeah. No, this question might come about because having the sensors program, it actually stemmed a lot from DF flexibility from the on-road omnibus program. Currently, we didn't have any thoughts on this proposal here and the off-road DF program, but that may be something we look into.
Yeah, if you have comments on that and would like to give us your concepts or suggestions, that would be very helpful. We do require some real reporting for on-road. So we're looking for folks' suggestions on this.
Thank you. Next actually is a comment. Sorry, PEM threshold question is moot if the plan is to ignore PEM in OBD sensor-based telemetry phase.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Next question. Can you highlight which of the requirements proposed here specifically are a result of intent to harmonize with global counterparts like China and the EU?
At least the in-use program is not specifically intended to harmonize because an in-use program with limits and the types of parameters and binning structures is not proposed in the EU or China currently. The only similar item would be China already requires OBD information telematically on their equipment. But other than that main element, the proposal is different in its details from China or the EU. I'm not sure if EU has OBD telematics requirements and the structure or the compliance related to that. In the EU, their current in-use program is called the In-Service Monitoring Program. They're currently, collecting data on their equipment with PEMS testing. That data is sent to their member states, so that really depends on which country the equipment goes to. And in their in-service monitoring program, it's for informational purposes only. Currently, that program doesn't have a enforcement piece related to it, so they don't exactly decide if something is a non-conformity or not in conformity or not. It's more of a monitoring to see how those engines are doing, at least at this time for the current EU regulations. They may be updating their regulations in the future also.
Thank you. Next question. If an equipment machine with an installed Tier 5 labeled engine is sold into California, but is moved or sold to another end user in another state, is this equipment considered to be included to the 75% of engine cells per engine family to submit data from the manufacturer?
So we're interested. This would not be a required data because since it's operating outside of California, but we will talk about it internally, and we'd like to hear more comments. This is a good one on whether or not we should allow the data from outside of California. Even though it's outside of California, I'm sure the equipment's operation is likely very similar to what's happening in California, and would be representative of other engines of that same type. Thank you for the question, though.
Thank you. At this moment, I'm going to check the raise hand section. Mr. Farah, seems you have one more question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I have a question regarding the bins, and so if I understood correctly, it works per 100 hours. So each 100 hour we store a value, and then let's say, so if the engine operate for 200 hours during the first year, and we have a bin with a value of 1.5, let's say, above the limit, and another one 2.1. Do we take the average, or if only one bin is above 2.1, we should go and do PEMS testing?
Yes, so I mean, if you have like two complete sets of 100 hours of data, those would actually be combined into the lifetime array.
Okay.
And then so it's kind of average in the case, there's only two sets, but as the year gets, as the equipment gets older and older, there's hundreds, thousands of hours of operation being added, and so we are interested in likely, we're interested in all the columns. We'd like to hear feedback on which bin, or sorry, which column there is most appropriate. I mean, we're interested in the stored 100 arrays, so stored 100 hour arrays. So that's the recent 100 hours of operation and how the engine was doing. But we're also, interested in the lifetime. So, how long has it been doing throughout its entire life, and how well has it been doing recently?
Okay.
Yeah. So we were kind of interested in both, and maybe we need to think about it more, and we'd like to hear feedback on, let's say the most recent 100 hours is maybe 2.1, slightly higher than how it's been over the lifetime array, and how we should handle that.
Mm-hmm. And how to handle, for example, when we have a NOx sensor problem and the NOx sensor is giving us wrong values. So from this time till the replacement of this NOx sensor, if you don't have any inducement, for example, then the machine can live with it, but maybe we have a NOx problem and we have, wrong values reported. How do we deal with this? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, that would be a major concern if one of these NOx sensors for one of the engines is not reporting correctly at all.
Yeah, Christian, at the bottom of your slide, it looks like it's cut off a little bit, at least on my screen, for the bin structure, but there is a separate bin to report to when there's a NOx sensor fault.
Oh.
Or if there's a mill on. We don't want to poison the data or pollute the data with, mill on emissions data. We don't want to combine that with the non-faulted data. So we do have separate recording.
Okay, so it's most likely to be excluded.
Yeah, and that wouldn't be part of the emissions compliance analysis, the mill on data. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. There is no more raised hands, so we are going back to Q&A section. Okay, next question. There will be some limit for ambient condition, ambient pressure, temperature, humidity, and or for engine parameter. Example, coolant temperature, to consider valid the data in phase 1, or the evaluation is made in all possible ambient engine conditions.
Oh, I think that's something that we'll have to take a look at. So, but as an example from the on-road side here, the on-road binning structure in table 2 shown there, like bins at least 1 through 14, they do not have any limits on ambient conditions or coolant or anything like that. However, there is a structure in bin 15 for special conditions for the NTE method, and there's some power limitations, RPM limitations for the NTE, but it also includes ambient pressure, temperature, and humidity. So if we would need to bake that in for the future program, there's already a history of it being possibly available to be done in a real base system. If you have, we're also requesting more comments from industry on this topic as well. But that's a good point if we're going to screen for them, and if there are kind of testing boundary conditions that we need to put in, how do we also apply it for the off-road real program? Thank you.
Next question, elaborate on why sole focus is on NOx.
NOx is one of, so here in California, one of the major goals to improve air quality, and one of the non-attainments for one of the national non-attainment, actually there's 2 items, especially here in Southern California, where a problem is NOx and ambient PM, ozone and PM. NOx is actually a contributor to both of these. It contributes to ozone through atmospheric reactions in the sun with hydrocarbons, leading to increased ozone, but also the NOx combined with different sulfates and phosphates contribute to secondary formation of PM as well. So although NOx is not the ambient air quality standard, NOx is very impactful to how things come about through atmospheric reactions. So NOx is the focus here because we have NOx sensors. So that's why that's the kind of NOx sensor program. In the PEMS half of testing, we're interested in all the criteria pollutants.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Next question, will you publish this Q&A together with the slide on the website? Jenna, please comment the question.
Yeah, so this Zoom work group is being recorded live, so we will post the Zoom recording on our website, and the slides are already there. We put them up a week ago. I don't think we will be publishing the Q&A though, because we've had over, I don't even know the number, we're getting to over 50 questions, and it takes a lot of time for staff to put that together, but they are available via, you can listen to the recording. And that will be posted in about a week or so.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Patrick Thompson, Emerson's. Please confirm the current plan is to ignore PEM in sensor-based screening. Is this based on perception that OBD PM sensors are incapable of screening level measurements?
We're interested in PEMS. We're interested in PM sensors technology. If out there you have more comments that we should include such PM sensors to the phase 1 testing, we'd like to hear about it. I know there is existence of PM sensors. CSERT from the University of California, Riverside is currently doing research projects that include PM sensors as part of their measurements. Currently, that's not standard or required equipment on engines, but there are commercially available, and they're being used by researchers, and not 100% sure how widespread it might be on equipment today. But there are things available for PM measurement, like you mentioned.
Thank you. Next question, who may perform PEMS test? Can the engine and equipment manufacturer outsource to a third party?
I think it's possible to outsource PEMS testing to a third party. I think that's currently done for the on-road program. There will be requirements where the testing has to be operated by the normal operator during an actual work condition, not just like a simulated work. So when I think about third party testing, it's really them installing and managing the PEMS equipment and the PEMS data recorded from the testing, but the actual equipment control and operation will be real world by the real driver doing real operation, whatever that might be for that equipment.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If the full useful life is changed from 8,000 hours to 12,000 hours or 15,000 hours on tier 5, will Carb change the DF durability test time to 12,000 or 15,000 hours? Jenna, please.
I think this is more of a durability certification question outside the topic that we're covering today. So that would be covered under a separate workshop. If the question is that if we changed full useful life and extended out to, let's say, 12,000 hours as an example, then that would change, the pool of vehicles that you would test. So you test to whatever the full useful life is when we amend and it's adopted. for in-use testing purposes, if that's the question.
Thank you. Next question. So if I understood correctly, when coming to PEMS testing, the conformity factor for PEM is 1, and for NOx, it will be 2 or 1 as well.
Here in this presentation for the PEMS testing, I don't think we've talked about the conformity factors or more details. We're still looking into that.
That's right. We haven't addressed that topic.
Yeah. On the NOx sensor side, it was just really a threshold if you're above 2, but for the actual conformity with PEMS, we did not mention anything like that. Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you. Next question. I believe the on-road real program stores the ECU sensor data and is downloaded via a scan tool, not telemetry required. How is the on-road data returned to Carp?
Kim, is this a question that you can take, or maybe Tom?
Sure. I think I can take it for the on-road heavy duty I&M program. They have options to report the data to Carb. Of course, one option being the telematics approach, as discussed already. There's another option where the owner could scan the vehicle themselves, not with the telematics device, but scan it and then upload it to Carb. And there might be a third option, but I can't remember it right now. So for this off-road program, I'm not sure. All I've heard today was the telematics approach. Is that correct, Jenna?
Yeah, that's right. We've only talked about a telematics approach for the off-road currently.
So I think maybe the question is saying the on-road vehicles are not mandated or not required to have the telemetry device set up, but that they are provided another option to report that data to Carb. Maybe that's the crux or the focus of the question there.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Okay. Yeah. So I do understand there's several options for the heavy duty on-road data.
We envisioned this program to be handled telematically, but we had mentioned previously on the slides, it would benefit a lot to have kind of like a harmonized approach amongst the equipment and engine manufacturers on how do we connect to the ECUs and the data protocols used. That would be helpful. But since the manufacturers would be collecting this data telematically, we thought that would be the easiest for our concept here. The HDI&M is kind of like on the owner side, so there's many avenues that Tom mentioned there that they could send in their data.
Right.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question. Will Carb require a sampling plan from the engine manufacturers, which equipments and engines to test? Jenna, can you please answer this question?
Yes, we'd like to hear more feedback from manufacturers on that. It's not something that we've put in our concept right now. It could be a requirement, but we'd like to hear feedback from manufacturers. And that would be when you say Carb sampling plan, I think that you're are you talking about PEMS? We may require that. We've done so in the past for on-road, and then in terms of which engines to test, that it would work similar to what's done for on-road, where the agency tells manufacturers which engine families to test. But we're looking for feedback as well.
Thank you. I don't see any more question in the Q&A box, neither in actually raised hand section.
Yeah, even though there's 8 Q&A, I think we've gone through all of them.
Yeah.
So do people have other questions? We can open up if you raise your hand, you can answer questions. We've taken quite a few questions already, over 60. Are there other questions that we haven't answered yet? That you have? We'll take a pause for a minute.
While we're waiting, I just wanted to put out a request. If something we heard from a couple commenters today was concerns regarding, Carb is asking for 75% data on 75% of engines within each engine family sold in California. And I'm not sure my customers would be willing to give me that. So if manufacturers have experiences to share, more data about how they currently try to access data from their customers, anything to help us understand more those connections or lack thereof, and ability to get data or difficulties getting data, I think would be really helpful for us to hear more about. And please always reach out. Always feel free to reach out to us personally if you don't want to talk about details in front of everybody else who might be at this work group meeting.
Right, and thanks, Kim. That's really important. Also, I don't think that our slides contained our email address on how to get a hold of us. And we should have had that, but anyhow, we put that on our slides from the November workshop, and we have an email box at tier 5, that's one word, TIER 5 at arb.ca.gov. So feel free to send us questions in that or data in that email. You can also email us directly with questions or comments. And if you'd like to set up a meeting with us, we've been meeting with OEMs regularly now, and many times we do follow-up meetings with folks. And we're if we haven't contacted you and you'd like to speak with us, we'd love to hear feedback on all our concepts.
Jenna, actually, I'm sharing right now the next step and the slide for.
Oh, terrific. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yes.
Did you have a comment, Christian?
Oh, I just wanted to thank Muslim for putting up our contact information.
All right. So, yeah, if we don't have any more questions, I think that you can, if you're not already subscribed to our tier 5 Gov delivery, please do subscribe. And this is our website. You can get the slides off this website. We'll be holding future work groups on different topics, as I mentioned before. Probably our next one will be on the low load cycle. And we're going to bring our proposal to the board in 2024-25 with implementation in 28-29. I do want to iterate that this is for the in-use testing. This is just the initial concept that we rolled out today, and we have taken careful notes and have noted your concerns and are going to go back and think about it. And we want to hear more feedback from you, and we will hone our concepts. So this is not the end, of course. So do we have any more questions? I think I don't know if we've I see that there's 4, but I know that we answered those. Is that right, Muslim?
Yes, there is no
Okay.
more question. Yeah.
All right. Well, any last comments, Jeff or Kim, Christian?
No, I just like everyone who participated just to say thank you, because it's been a good discussion. We've had some good questions and there's a lot for us to think about. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for spending this 2.5 hours with us. And again, we're listening to your comments and we value them. And we'll see you at the next working group.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.